Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the horrific case of Barbara Olsen, a 78-year-old great-grandmother who was brutally murdered for just $155. Barbara Jean Shipman, who more commonly went by Barb, was born on the 2nd of July 1934 in Eau Claire County, Wisconsin, to Mansell and Eunice Shipman. She grew up with two sisters, Sandy and Bee, and attended Bloomer High School in Wisconsin. She graduated in 1952 and married Wesley Olsen on the 27th of February 1954. The couple had a long and happy marriage and had 3 children together, 2 daughters, Joy and Judy, and a son named Stephen. Barb retired in 1996 and enjoyed spending her time gardening, playing piano, crafting, watching the Green Bay Packers, and tracing her family heritage. She loved spending time with her large family, which by this time included 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. She was a volunteer driver, taking elderly people to and from their appointments, and she was also an active member of the local church. By 2012, Barb lived alone on West Ridge Drive in Sheboygan Falls. Her husband Wesley, by this time suffering with Alzheimer's, and was now living in a nursing home. Barb's daughter Judy lived just a few miles away, and Barb would often pop in to visit Judy of a morning. On Tuesday the 18th of September 2012, Barbara didn't visit her daughter. This wasn't necessarily a cause for alarm, but when Barb didn't visit the following day, Judy became concerned. She called and texted her mother, but got no reply. Judy decided to visit Barb's house and entered through the garage door. It was here that she found her mother lying on the ground covered in blood. Judy ran to the nearest neighbour's house and called the police. She returned with the neighbour and, too traumatised to go near her mother's body, the neighbour had to check to see if Barb was still breathing. The authorities pronounced that she was dead shortly afterwards. When Barb was found, she had a blanket covering her head. Under this, she had been beaten to such an extent that the top of her head was crushed and her face unrecognisable. There was a trail of blood from the house to the garage indicating that the attack had taken place inside Barb's home. At the autopsy, it was established that Barb had suffered at least 27 blows to her head, face and arms. A murder investigation was immediately underway. Barb was a kind, peaceful lady who had no enemies. Family members and neighbours were questioned and CCTV footage from the area was examined. This CCTV footage led the police to 2 13-year-old boys, Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Paape. They were both present at Barb's house at the time of her death. Antonio was Barb's great-grandson. Nathan was the first to be questioned by the police. He became hysterical during the interview and said that he could not say what he needed to in front of his mother. He asked for a piece of paper so that he could write down what happened, stating, "He killed his grandma and I was with him." Soon after, Antonio was interviewed. Whilst he was initially reluctant to answer any questions, he soon confessed to the crime and told the police his story of what had happened. On Friday the 14th of September 2012, Antonio ran away from social care and went to stay at Nathan's house. By the following Monday, he told Nathan that he knew where they could get their hands on some money. The 2 boys asked Nathan's mum to drive them to Sheboygan Falls under the pretense that they wanted to visit a friend. Instead, they made their way to Barb's house. Realising that the garage door was open, they crept inside. However, Barb heard a noise and went to the garage to see what was going on. When she saw her great-grandson and his friend, she asked them if they were in the garage because they were cold and then invited them into her house. Knowing that Antonio had run away, Barb said that she needed to call his mother to let her know that he was safe. It was at that moment that Antonio attacked the 78-year-old woman, hitting her in the head with a hatchet. It is at this point that the 2 boys' versions of what happened began to differ. Antonio stated that after the first blow, he ran to the bathroom as he felt sick, and when he returned he saw Nathan beating Barb with a hammer. Contrastingly, Nathan claimed that he believed any talk of killing Barb was a joke and that they were just going to scare her. He said that he witnessed Antonio beating Barb and that he himself had only hit her twice when Antonio asked for help because he feared the consequences if he hadn't. After Barb was dead, the two boys dragged her to the garage and tried to put Barb's body into the boot of her car. When they were unable to do this, they covered her head with a blanket and left her in the garage. Returning to the house, they wiped down all of the surfaces that they had touched before stealing her jewellery, credit card, $155, and some other items. They drove away in Barb's car, which they abandoned at a Sheboygan bowling alley. They left the keys in the ignition and many of the stolen items in view in the hope that someone would steal the car and then be implicated as the murderer. After this, they went and ordered pizza at a nearby restaurant using Barb's money to pay. The police would later find the murder weapons and a crocheted blanket that was covered in blood in the boot of the car. The two boys first appeared in court on Friday the 21st of September 2012, where it was confirmed that they were each charged as adults with first-degree intentional homicide and held on $1 million bail. Antonio claimed that he was not guilty of murder due to suffering from mental illness. Some 3 years earlier, when he was 10 years old, he was riding his bike when he was hit by a car. As a result, he had a traumatic brain injury that altered his personality and also prevented him from taking part in sports such as football and boxing. He was assessed, and whilst it was recognised that he had an unspecified cognitive disorder, he was deemed competent to stand trial. He later changed his plea to no contest as part of an agreement with the prosecutors. Nathan pled not guilty, and at trial Antonio testified against him. After just 2 hours, the jury found that he was guilty of first-degree intentional murder. Nathan was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 31 years. Antonio was convicted of first-degree intentional murder and was also sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 36 years. At the sentencing hearing, Antonio's grandmother, Barb's daughter, read a statement in which she said, "My mum was not a vindictive person. She would want Antonio to have a chance to be a better person, to have hope, to have something to work towards." Antonio tried to read an apologetic statement to the court, but was too distressed to do so. He passed it to his defence attorney, who had to fight back tears as he read it aloud. Antonio will be eligible for parole when he is 50 years old. That concludes today's story. Please add any comments down below. Thanks very much for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. New York is famous for its New Year's Eve ball drop. However, in Sheboygan County, they are known for their big cheese drop on New Year's Eve, as nearby Plymouth is officially the cheese capital of the world. Goodbye.